Donald Trump's version of the Republican National Convention is anything but boring. Will the master plan for the Central Embarcadero be shaped by the developers that build it? Meanwhile, in the North Embarcadero, what happened to the parks and open spaces approved by the Coastal Commission? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, politics editor for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, how you doing?
Good to have you back again. Reporter Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Andy.
How you doing, Mark?
Glad you're here today. And reporter Brad Racino of iNewsSource. Welcome back, Brad.
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you today. Well, in accepting the GOP nomination, Donald Trump painted an America besieged by violence, economic ruin, illegal immigrants, feckless politicians, greedy elites, and most evil of all, Hillary Clinton. At times, it seemed that Trump was describing an America right out of the Mad Max movies. Michael, quite a finale in Cleveland there. Resemble anything you've seen in previous Republican conventions, like the one 20 years ago in San Diego?
I had Escape from New York rather than Mad Max.
Okay, very good. I'll give you that.
You know, if you judge by my Twitter feed, I'm one of the few people that actually thought he had a pretty good night. Mm-hmm. You know, he did everything you said, but he was disciplined, which is not a characteristic for Donald Trump. It looked like he pretty much kept to the script, and I think the speech was written to have sort of some of Trump-isms, you know, pulled into it and so forth. Like you said, that he got, you know, very dark, and you know, he's, you know, painted the country and the world, really, you know, as a disastrous place that only he and he alone, I think he used that term,
right,
can fix. He also spent a lot of time on that score, I mean, with immigration and law and order, which is a little bit of a new thing, but, you know, he went how he got here. And, you know, some people thought, should he try to broaden out? You know, he kind of has won this way, and he's sticking to that. Mm-hmm. Whether he can broaden out to the folks beyond that have supported him remains to be seen. But, you know, he has tapped into that anger, and he showed his anger, I think, trying to channel what he thinks is out there. There's a lot of disillusioned people. They think that they've been left behind despite some economic progress. And he spent a lot of time talking about trade, which is very interesting because a lot of people felt they were sold a bill of goods on all this trade stuff. We remember NAFTA, and it was going to, you know, raise all boats, or lift all boats. And a lot of people don't feel that way. So he's really tapped into that.
Traditionally led by his party, the Republican
Party.
Correct.
I mean, that is really unusual. But, you know, clearly we know that there's something out there that he's tapping into. Mm-hmm. And I thought he was, you know, going back to that well. So
I mentioned at the outset, and the other huge theme of the week, of course, was Hillary Clinton. One speaker, former candidate Ben Carson, said Clinton cavorts with Lucifer, the devil. Top Trump surrogate said she should be shot for treason. Chris Christie, another failed candidate, tried her in absentia. Ever been this kind of demonizing of a candidate? Well,
I remember certain people, I wasn't there, but reading about that FDR, some people suggested he'd do best with a bullet in his head. Mm-hmm. So it's extreme. I mean, particularly when you have a delegate from New Hampshire suggesting she be taken out and shot. Now, I know this is sort of rhetorical stuff. I think former Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham said something similar about President Clinton at the time, but that triggered a Secret Service investigation. Maybe
and I think this one has too,
actually. It was cursory. No, this one is one I was talking about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's gotten to that level. We know that the divisions are there and the extreme rhetoric is there, but yeah, it doesn't always seem to get ratcheted up.
Yeah. Now, it's been well documented. Fact checkers have been working overtime this campaign season. Donald Trump has been off script typically in his speeches. He lies often in these speeches. The Washington Post, among others, found dozens of untruths, exaggerations, dubious claims in last night's. How does that fly not only with those supporting him, but the general electorate?
Well, we'll find out about the general electorate. It hasn't bothered him at all, as far as I can tell, because that's been his MO throughout. He says whatever he thinks, regardless of the facts, and people, you know, in the media and the political class pull out their hair and point it out, but and you can bring it to a lot of his supporters. I don't think they particularly care. They view those as details. It's the larger themes that I think he's, you know, triggering with his supporters on.
I think,
Brad?
I think he might have inspired an entire department in PolitiFacts fact-checking.
Yeah, there could be. It's an expanding workforce there. Huh?
Well, but I mean, so we have the Democratic convention next week, and what's Hillary Clinton going to do? Go put up a chart that shows that violent crime hasn't risen very much, and implore the country to take notice of the.
Actually, the president had a press conference this morning, and he noted that it hasn't.
And I would love to believe that that's going to turn the tide, and suddenly facts will win out over emotion, and this will stop being an effective strategy. But we've got a year's worth of evidence right now that that's just not how it's going to go. And I think what's interesting for me is kind of trying to predict, how history will play out, which is if he loses, then this is a convention that was out of tone and out of sync with what we've come to expect from the Republican Party. But if he loses, then it's just one thing that happened. It's a blip on the radar, and the party kind of
regroups, does
tries
whatever
to
it's
go
going
back
to do from
the shining city on the hill type of mentality. But if he wins, then we're looking at a fundamental shift of the what would then be the controlling party in American politics.
Well, let's hear a little bit here. We have a bite coming up. Many compared his fear-mongering done last night to Richard Nixon in 1968. Of course, that was a time of assassinations and riots, deep divisions over the Vietnam War. New York Times observed today Nixon, though, wrapped his iron fist in a glove, and velvet glove, and of course, Mr. Trump is bare knuckle. Let's hear a little bit here.
Americans watching this address tonight have seen the recent images of violence in our streets and the chaos in our communities. Many have witnessed this violence personally. Some have even been its victims. I have a message for all of you. The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon, and I mean very soon, come to an end.
All right, how does he do this? He's promising almost ridiculous things here, and immediately. How does that work?
Well, he doesn't say. I mean, and he hasn't said. That's been the big criticism. But again, I think it's sort of like the poor fact checkers who say he's wrong, he's wrong. It doesn't seem to really hurt him in that regard. What I found interesting about last night is he said that he was going to lay out his solutions, and then, of course, he never did. I mean, why he even went that far to say that, because it sort of underscored the fact that he really doesn't. But I think that let's face it, conventions are not a laundry list of programmatic things that you're going to do. It is the larger themes. He could have been a little bit more positive. I mean, some people thought that and Andrew mentioned the shining city on the hill, the Reagan, the morning in America. Some people were pining for that. He's not Ronald Reagan. But he could have had a little bit more uplifting about America, the American character, and how we'll pull together, something like that. But it's Donald Trump. I mean, it really was, he's trying to, doing the fear thing to scare people into supporting him, I would think.
Now, I did want to touch on, and I'm not going to elaborate on this big story. Earlier in the week, his wife, Donald Trump's wife, Meliana, plagiarized a 2008 convention speech of First Lady Michelle Obama. But that reminds me of a very different reception in San Diego here 20 years ago when Bob Dole's wife, Elizabeth, wowed the hall here. Remind us what happened there.
Well, the convention here was so much different. It was totally scripted. There was no dissent. They wouldn't let dissenters on the stage, and frankly, it was kind of boring. As much as it
Ted Koppel, Nightline, pulled out on Wednesdays, said it's too boring.
Yeah, as much as it shed San Diego in a nice light, we have a pretty face, and that goes a long way. But Elizabeth Dole, she sort of did the Oprah thing. She took the mic and she went out into the crowd and did that real personable aspect, which she's got that down-home appeal, which was part of her charm and why she was a successful politician in her own right. Melania, this was her introduction really to the country. We knew who Elizabeth Dole was, so it was just a different style. But frankly, that night Melania was getting a lot of credit for that speech. I thought it went well, and then holy cow, no wonder why it was so good. It came from somewhere else.
Yeah, and ironically, who it came from.
You could go back to a lot of famous political speeches, not just Joe Biden, but people do pinch from others.
Right.
So.
But in that they didn't even use the free software that college freshmen seem to use. I did want to go to another bite here. Scores of Republican leaders, including the Republican governor of Ohio, stayed away from this. One leader of many delegates should have stayed away was Senator Ted Cruz. Refused to endorse Trump in his speech famously, and he told Americans to vote their conscience, the slogan of the Never Trump movement. Here's Cruz, a little bit of Cruz Wednesday night.
If you love our country and love your children as much as I know that you do, stand and speak and vote your conscience. Vote for candidates up and down the ticket who you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution.
Not a great moment of unity there. And Trump today, here on Friday, he's not letting this go. I mean, he...
No, it was a remarkable moment in the convention that, a primetime speaker is booed by the crowd. I guess, trying to look at the silver lining that he let Cruzs speak there. In other conventions, they don't let any dissenters, but I think he was also hoping to appeal to Cruz's people. We'll see how that goes. But it was really remarkable. You mentioned this morning, Trump had sort of a meltdown where he just reinvigorated this whole feud that he's had with Cruzs, and
went after his father again,
whether my view holds that I thought Trump had a pretty decent night last night, to what degree that went out the window. Certainly the notion that he's disciplined went out the window, because the day after a convention, you're out there talking about what you're going to do as president. You travel the country, and to get into this low-level pissing match is really remarkable.
Couple seconds left in this segment. Democrats meet in Philadelphia starting next week on Monday. Everyone expects clear contrast to the Trump show. What do you expect?
Well, it's going to be much calmer, you would think. I mean, the main opponent, Bernie Sanders, has jumped on board, and I think that they've made accommodations in the platform and in the convention to bring those people in and let them have a say, and the platform's been shaped to do that. So, yeah, I think it's going to be much more orderly, certainly. But, we'll see how it goes.
All right, and maybe they'll even mention global warming. Who knows? Which comes first, the waterfront development or the plan to develop the waterfront? By state law, the Port of San Diego, landlord for waterfront properties all along San Diego Bay, must have a long-range master plan for its properties. The Port's been working on it for 3 years, but doesn't have a master plan yet. Nevertheless, the Port just approved a massive $1.2 billion redevelopment for Seaport Village with no plan in place. Andrew faces a lawsuit here, a criticism, perhaps a lawsuit. What's going on here? Why?
I should add one small correction. They do have a master plan. It's just 30+ years old.
Yeah, and they call it a vision, right?
Yeah, and you're supposed to redo your plan every 20 years or so. So they do technically have a plan. It's just out of date.
Okay.
But so what's more important here is that by everyone's estimation, what the Port's decided to do is, instead of completing a process by which they decide how everything in the Port, everything under their jurisdiction works together and how they can best maximize all their assets, they've kind of taken two specific assets in isolation and kind of opened up the bidding to the development world and the private sector and said, what do you think we should do here?
All right, and what are those specifically? So
that's the area currently home to Seaport Village. Mm-hmm. It's called the Central Embarcadero technically, and it's a little bit bigger than what the retail center that you think of as Seaport Village, but that's where it is. Mm-hmm. And then Harbor Island.
Okay.
And so it isn't that that is fundamentally wrong, that the private sector couldn't possibly propose good ideas. It's just that the future of those areas, and these developments will be 50 to 100 year projects, is being fundamentally framed not by the people who have been appointed in order to protect the public trust, but by other people. Now the
idea in planning is to have a plan here, and then, hey, you got to conform to this plan. Here's what the public's interest is.
And I should also be clear that the Port Commission will be selecting from those ideas that come forward. It is not as though they have completely relinquished their authority to the private sector. It's just that the ideas from which they will choose will come from private parties.
Okay. All right. And the whole idea behind that's the California Coastal Act that mandates that the Port have this plan in the public trust. Right?
Yeah, it mandates that, or something equivalent to CEQA, basically, the California Environmental Quality Act.
And when is this master plan, this update that they've been working on, when's that supposed to be done?
Yeah, I think their current timeline says that they would finish it best case scenario in a year, probably going to be a little bit longer than that, and they've got some environmental planning and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And that, what they've said now is that basically they've put the master plan, the plan to plan the entire area on the same track, on a parallel track as their plan to select development projects for these two areas. Mm-hmm. And they say, once we choose these things, we'll have great, beautiful, fantastic, world-class visions for those areas, and we'll just plug those into the master plan, and then they'll kind of be the keystones on which the entire plan is built.
Okay, now tell the one that's this one project and vision that they've somewhat thrown holy water on is for Seaport Village. Give us the high points of the one they
had 6 proposals before them. Really, it was 4. The other 2 were a little bit smaller. So they had 4 plans before them that envisioned remaking the entire area. And in something of a surprise, they cautiously chose one of those to move forward. So it's a plan by a company called GAFCON, and some other people that are associated with that company, Jeff Jacobs, the plan would be to create a big, large public beach along the waterfront there, as well as some hotels, an aquarium. I guess its most iconic feature would be a big tower that is supposed to have some visual elements that would play off of the Coronado Bridge. A lot of retail space. It's a very commercial development, but it also includes big public esplanade on the water and a beach.
All right. We're going to get more into Attorney Cory Briggs, but I didn't want to introduce him and ask Brad a question about that. He says he'll sue the port for going ahead on this Seaport Village discussion and plan right now. Remind us who Cory Briggs is and why is he saying he's going to sue?
Well, I can remind you who Cory Briggs is. He's a local attorney, environmental attorney, who's known for suing government agencies and municipalities under CEQA, also for open government reasons, for emails from city officials, et cetera.
That's the California Environmental Quality Act.
Right. He's been involved for years with the port. That's kind of part of where he made his name way back in, I think it was 2000. I want to say 7 or 8, when he started suing over the Navy Broadway complex, the massive redevelopment that's going to happen right on the northern edge of the Central Embarcadero, right between there and North Embarcadero. As far as this threatened lawsuit, Andy can probably talk more to that. Cory Briggs will not speak to me, nor will any of his members of the coalition.
Okay, that was one of my questions down the line, but you've got that out of the way. Well, let me ask you then, in your story, Andy, the Briggs is quoted as saying the Port District is already very familiar with my client's concerns about piecemeal planning. First of all, who's his client in this regard?
His client is the same client that he sued on the Navy Broadway. It's the Navy Broadway Complex Coalition.
Okay, and we won't.
And there are some public members of that. Diane Coombs and Don Wood are two that are frequently public about their association with that organization. And basically, they say that they're suing to uphold the public trust. That on this specific lawsuit, it's a claim that it's piecemeal planning, that they're going along with large-scale pieces of a master plan without having a new master plan in place. So essentially, you could do small little things here and there and minor revisions to your already developed areas, but anything that is substantial in scale needs to be part of a whole master plan area. The port, to be clear, says, yeah, we are familiar with his concerns and they're without foundation. That they seem like they had their legal counsel spoke at the meeting when they gave cautious approval to one of these projects and said that they don't really have any concerns about losing this lawsuit.
Might it not be easier just to wait till the plan's done, though, avoid the criticism, avoid maybe a lawsuit, and it's going to be years before it's all built anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think to play devil's advocate or to suggest what the port might say to that is, sure, but if you have a plan in front of you that you like so much that you would like to build the rest of your master plan around it, then why wait? Or they might alternatively say, the real estate market is hot now, and when the real estate market is at the peak of its cycle, that's when you need to strike these deals. Because you wait 2-3 years, we might be in the pit of the next recession, and then you've got another 2-3 years to wait. So that's the devil's advocate perspective on why you act quickly.
All right, we're going to move on to the first cousin of this topic here. Unlike the long-range master plan for the entire San Diego Bay, there actually is a plan for part of it. It's called the North Embarcadero Visionary Plan, became law in 2001. Perhaps the port commissioners had Theodore Roosevelt in mind when they created it. Passing through San Diego in 1915, Roosevelt said, keep your waterfront and develop it so it may add to the beauty of your city. Don't let a number of private citizens usurp it and make it hideous with buildings your children will have to pay an exorbitant sum to tear down. So, tell us about this visionary plans and put the place for us to begin with so the audience knows where we're talking about.
So the North Embarcadero is a 1.2-mile stretch of land right just north of Seaport Village, and it runs up to pretty much the airport, and it encompasses some pretty familiar attractions. I mean, the Midway, the Star of India, the B Street Pier, the Broadway Pier.
A lot of landmarks
all
right
of that,
in there.
Yeah, all of that land. And it's all under the port's jurisdiction. And way back in the 90s, a former port commissioner, Mike McDade, had used his knowledge and all his connections to bring together the 5 different government agencies at different levels that had a hand in that land. So it was the Navy, it was the city, the county, the port, and at the time CCDC. And they came up with this plan to create San Diego's front porch and make it a gift to the citizens of San Diego. Open park spaces, a lot of walkable land. And it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of input from the public. There were a lot of meetings, a lot of conferences around this, and eventually they came up with this plan. And it was, at the time, it was just a vision, it was just a plan. It was not law, it was just something they were going to work toward. Well, at one point they did actually adopt it into the master plan, which is what we're talking about now, but it's an older version. And so at that point, with the Coastal Commission's blessing, it became law. They had to institute this.
This was it in black and white.
This is it. Well, after McDade left, over the next 10, 12 years, piece by piece by piece, it all fell apart.
Well, introduce us to a man named Steve Cushman, who some audience members may know about here. You interviewed him at length about this. What's his role in this?
Steve Cushman's a very well-known figure in San Diego, whether it's through his auto dealerships, travel industry. He's been in advisory capacity to, I think, 4 or 5 different mayors. He was also a 3-term port commissioner, which is also unusual. Usually they run for 2 terms. This one, he got a 3rd term in. And he, at the port, according to everyone that we talked to, he had a very strong hand in decisions that were made, and he really favored development. His vision was, well, you can't make park spaces, you can't make public land unless you have the money to maintain them. And the money is going to come from these developments that eventually usurped that plan. So it's kind of this vicious circle of, where does the money come from?
So parks are nice, but no revenue there. He was looking for revenue streams.
Right, he's looking for revenue streams. One of his main things was the Lanefield hotels, which one of them is up now, the other one's coming soon. And those are big, huge developments right in one little section that kind of is a really central area, because initially in the plan there was going to be this grand oval park, and that's what got environmentalists all up in a tizzy over the years. Is we were promised this park, this front porch, and where is it now?
It's gone.
And it was kind of taken away in favor of Broadway and the cruise ships that are coming in, Lanefield, all these areas.
Now we mentioned earlier Attorney Cory Briggs, who has sued the city, and lots of folks around here lots of times. But your story noted that he works pretty closely with Steve Cushman here, which seems surprising since he does sue these entities.
It was surprising to some of the people who were involved in his Navy Broadway Complex Coalition, who told me, multiple people, they had no idea that he had been going for at least a year and working out details. I mean, there was an article in the UT that I had cited in the story about Briggs and Cushman working out a deal for the North Embarcadero on the back of a cocktail napkin. And the legal counsel at the coalition told me they'd never even heard of this. They didn't know this was going on. So Cushman admitted as such. He said, yeah, Cory and I work together all the time. We work closely on this.
Talk all the time, yeah.
Yeah, along with who was then Councilman Kevin Faulkner, now mayor, that the 3 of them worked together to come up with this compromise.
So that's what Cushman said when you said, hey, yes, we do, and he admits it. And as you said, Briggs doesn't really talk to you here for various reasons that we don't have time for today. Now, but there's 2 unelected folks, maybe not in the shadows as Cushman's role and all, but still this whole plan, as you say, the park, the big oval, it went away, and that rankles some people because these aren't really elected officials who
right, and you kind of see history possibly repeating itself here with what's going on in the Central Embarcadero, and Cory Briggs being back in the game with the coalition saying we're going to sue again. If you kind of look back at his history of the lawsuits against the port, they were not very successful almost ever. He actually just lost. He appealed the Navy Broadway lawsuit and appealed it to be put in front of all the judges in the appellate court, and they denied that last week. So his only choice now is to go to the Supreme Court, I think, to kill Navy Broadway.
Not a great track record. Well, we do had one person you talked to among those that you did was former Port Commissioner Lori Black, not too happy about what's happened with the North Embarcadero. Let's hear that.
The Port Master Plan over the years has obviously been amended to include this. Certainly there was never any kind of mention in the Port Master Plan going way back when, including the initial North Embarcadero Visionary Plan. There was nothing built here on Broadway Pier. This was all about creating the open space as you come down Broadway, and those plans and those visions go back over 100 years to Alonzo Horton.
All right, so where are we now? What's the situation now and going forward?
Well, most of the North Embarcadero has just been put on permanent pause because they say, when we wrote this story, that there wasn't the money to go along with Phase 2 and Phase 3. I actually sat down with Bob Nelson, one of the commissioners, 2 days ago, who said that he talked to the CEO recently and got the okay that they do have the money for going forward for the Grape Street piers, for doing some work on Pacific Highway to institute the next phases of this, along with they have the money to do all these project descriptions for pretty much everything under the port's jurisdiction right now. Now, whether or not that actually happens is another question, but they seem to have the capacity to at least going forward, kind of bring in this vision, but whether or not they do it, but the rest of it is pretty much lost. I don't think they're going to.
Well, as you were saying, Andy, the timing's good, supposedly, to a lot of folks.
And I think maybe we should clarify to people who maybe don't understand that much about how the port works. These are the port are run by appointed officials from the 5 cities that are situated around the state public title lands area. They're kind of the state appointed landlords of that area. And they don't collect taxes, so they don't get revenue from traditional public sources. They get they get revenue at this point largely from real estate.
Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. I'm going to have to leave that, and we'll follow this up. I know both of you are going to continue reporting on that, and I appreciate it. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, and Brad Racino of iNewsSource. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.